Caleb Williams continues to stay atop everyone's mock drafts and big boards, despite this being the season of changing things up for the sake of changing things up. Former Heisman winner still expected to be the top overall pick by the Chicago Bears when the NFL draft takes place later this month in Detroit. Let's welcome in Sam Monson from Pro Football Focus. Sam's PFF's lead NFL analyst. And Sam, great to have you back here. You know, it's interesting. You and I recently, when we did our segment, the Brock Bowers topic really triggered what we're going to talk about today, which is not only the grades that we have with some of these prospects, but how far back we're going and comparing to some other high names there. Again, you talked about Brock Bowers being the best since you guys have graded back in the mid-2010s. So if we talk about Caleb Williams being graded higher than a couple of former number one overall picks here, take us through what you guys have in terms of those grades and a couple of names there that he's better than.
Yeah, Caleb Williams has some absolutely outstanding PFF grading. When you look at his college career, multiple seasons with a PFF grade above 90. Generally speaking, that 90 number is a nice threshold to break. If you can clear that, you're into the elite area of high-end quarterback play or just play across the board, regardless of position. And he's up there above 93. And that puts him in some very, very rare air indeed. He's up there with the best quarterback prospects we've seen, ahead of guys like Trevor Lawrence, who was seen as this generational prospect coming out, Kyler Murray, who was seen as incredible, Joe Burrow, who had one of the greatest college seasons of all time, and right up there tied with the best season we'd seen from Bryce Young. So it's not quite the highest graded season PFF has ever seen, and it doesn't necessarily mean everything. Somebody like Justin Herbert, for example, has his best college season didn't even clear 90. It was just at the 89 level. But it's a great data point for Caleb Williams to say we've already seen at his very best, he has put together seasons that stack up with the best quarterbacks we've seen enter the league in the last several years.
Just to piggyback off that conversation, taking a look at that list, there's a lot of guys in basically the last 4 or 5 year range. Is there something about quarterbacks during that time frame, like a Bryce Young last year, like the aforementioned guys you talked about that sort of have these 90 plus grades?
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at first-round quarterbacks over the last several years, and all of the guys that have been put in the first round or been drafted in the first round over that period of time have almost all played spectacular football at some point during their college career. So there's the odd exception here or there. A guy like Jordan Love, for example, his best season was significantly further below that mark, even though he's turned out to be a very good NFL player with some time on the bench to develop and to grow. But generally speaking, these guys that are expected to get drafted at the top of the first round, in any given draft, you need to have seen some spectacular college play from them to justify that spot.
Okay, we know it's going to be a top-heavy quarterback round, especially in that first round of the draft. It's considered a top-heavy and deep wide receiver class as well. And we've seen Malik Neighbors certainly rise up in some of these mock drafts right here. But Malik Neighbors, for you guys, graded as a top 3 wide receiver all time, Sam?
Yeah, Malik Neighbors has some spectacular grading. He's obviously got spectacular production as well. And wide receiver can be tricky because it's to a certain extent dependent on the quarterback throwing in the football. Malik Neighbors is dealing with a quarterback who might get drafted number 2 overall in Jaden Daniels, whereas Marvin Harrison Jr.'s quarterback is transferring out of Ohio State to Syracuse this offseason. So the guy throwing him the football is obviously a huge determining factor in this. But Malik Neighbors this season was pretty spectacular, and the only 2 high draft picks we've seen with a better PFF grade over a single season in recent years are Amari Cooper all the way back in 2014 and then Devontae Smith a few years ago as well. So Malik Neighbors, with that incredible skill set, has also been as good as we've seen from any receiver over a single season.
Saw that list, a lot of SEC guys. We did have a little drop note on Marvin Harrison Jr., who fell just below that 90 threshold. Why was that grade 89 and change for the Ohio State prospect?
Yeah, as I say, some of that is the quarterback play. You look this year in particular, I mean, Marvin Harrison Jr. was probably shortchanged out of 500 yards worth of production by his quarterback this season. They need to be given the opportunity to make some of those plays in order to attain the highest grades, because ultimately separating is only half the job. You need to know that they're going to finish the play, come down with the football, and to do that, you need a well-thrown pass. You need a catchable pass, and Marvin Harrison just wasn't getting those this year enough.
If we switch over to the running back group, I'm curious to get your thoughts because the way you explain the wide receiver grading dependent on other position groups when it comes to running backs, and we're going to focus on one in just a second here, but as a whole, how are running backs graded in terms of the line in front of them and some of the other position groups that have an effect or influence?
Yeah, I mean, in the NFL, running back is probably the most dependent position in all of football. We know those guys need an offensive line in front of them to open up running lanes and to give them a chance to make plays. At the college level, it's a little bit less. They can make a bit more of their own plays. Sort of the lower down the level of football you get, the more impact a running back's ability on its own can have. High school level, you don't need great blocking in front of them at all. So the college level, they do still need some help. They need a good offensive line, but it's not quite as dependent as it is at the NFL level. They can do a little bit more on their own if they are a special talent.
So if we talk about someone like Blake Corum, who had a wonderful run in the national championship for Jim Harbaugh, he did suffer that injury. So how much do you guys have in terms of the splits of pre-injury for Blake Corum? I know that 22 class was certainly stacked as well, but just take me through the thought process of how to discern Blake Corum going into the draft.
Yeah, last season Blake Corum was a good player. 2023 Blake Corum was good. 2022 Blake Corum I think was a special player. That guy would stack up against any running back we've seen come into the league in the last several years, certainly in terms of PFF grading. Guys like Bijan Robinson or Jahmyr Gibbs, once you get to the testing and the measurables and the 40 time and those kinds of things, they would separate themselves from Corum. But on the field, the 2022 version of Blake Corum is one of the best college football running backs we've seen in a long time. PFF grade of 96 was a genuinely special area. Broke 70-plus tackles and averaged almost a full yard more after contact that season than he did the following year when he was coming back off that knee injury.
Let's get to the other side of the ball. We have Laiatu Latu, the edge rusher out of UCLA, and graded above the likes of an Aiden Hutchinson from Michigan when he came out of school.
Yeah, I think Latu is kind of being slept on this draft class. He's seen as a good edge rusher prospect and a guy that's going to go in the middle of the first round somewhere. But the PFF grading on Latu suggests he should be stacked up with the very best edge rushers to enter the league in the last decade. The only guys that you could look at that have conclusive, definitively better grading than he does over multiple years are Chase Young and Nick Bosa, and maybe Myles Garrett, depending on how far back you want to go. But his grading stacks up with everybody else, and he has the highest pass rush win rate over a single season of any of these guys, just edging those other top prospects. So Latu's measurables were better than people expected them to be, and his production on the field is as good as any edge rusher we've seen. I think this guy should be a top 10 draft pick. Which
is interesting because there's disparity of the mock drafts having him going into the mid to late first round. And of course, Aiden Hutchinson, second overall back in 2022. Sam, great to be with you once again. Thanks for hopping on HQ Spotlight.